So, again, good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Ginger.
I just wanted to say, I look forward to I'm happy to be leading the conversation again. It's been a long time. I look forward to having a really good conversation about chapter 7. I've already talked to Michael a little bit. He's got some views that are a little bit different than what I think. I was talking to Kent a little bit before. I know that Max wants to read something from John MacArthur, I believe. And I have a slide that is titled, "Who are the 144,000?" So is that what it had to do with, Max?
Well, sort of.
Okay.
Do you want to do it now? Or?
I'm sure. Yeah, I can do it now because it really is just a couple of things.
Okay.
And it actually has to do with how they are listed.
Okay.
How about what?
How they are listed.
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 Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, the specific tribal names in the list raise three interesting questions. Why is Judah listed first, even though Reuben was the firstborn? Why is the tribe of Dan omitted? And why is Ephraim omitted in favor of his father Joseph? Reuben forfeited his birthright as punishment for his sexual misconduct with his father's concubine. The omission of the tribe of Dan in favor of the priestly tribe of Levi probably is due to the tribe's reputation for idolatry. And then it also could be that the Antichrist came from the tribe of Dan. That was a question mark. While Dan will share in the millennial blessings, while the tribe will not be selected for this duty, nor protected during the tribulation. Similarly, the name of Ephraim is omitted in favor of his father Joseph, who is in the bloodline of Jesus, because Ephraim defected from the ruling house of Judah. Like Dan, Ephraim was consumed with idolatry. His brother Manasseh is included because he was the faithful son of Joseph. Last little bit. The critical passage reinforces the biblical truth that God is not through with the nation of Israel. Though Israel failed in its mission to be a witness nation, that will not be the case in the future. From the Jewish people will come the greatest missionary force the world has ever known. And that's what I thought was interesting.
Yep. And I came across a lot of that in my study. And that little bit that Max just read, that lends itself to what I'm trying to say. I don't intend to teach anybody anything today, because this chapter and these things about the 144,000, who are they? Is it the church? Is it the Jews? Is it, this, that, whatever? There's a lot of views on it, and I'm not intending to try to change anybody's mind. So I look forward to having the conversation. Obviously, I'm going to tell you what I think, and I'm going to present some points and that kind of thing. But I look forward to hearing. I don't want anybody to be afraid to speak up. And if you've looked at commentary this week, if you've studied it at all, speak up and say what you found. So obviously on this first slide, two big points in this chapter are the 144,000, whoever they are, and vast, innumerable crowd. So we're going to be talking about some of those things. One of the first things that I want to point out, that it'll be interesting to see what you guys have to say, is this idea that I came across late in my study, which once I came across it and I started looking into it, it made a lot of sense to me. And that is that chapter 7 is a parentheses chapter. And this kind of backs up what I heard somebody say earlier in this study of Revelation. It might have been Michael, that it's not necessarily true that Revelation is meant to be read from chapter to chapter in chronological order, and this is the order of things, the way that things happen. What I found out in chapter 7 is that if you try to do that, you're going to get confused. Because you're going to see the way things are different in chapter 7 than they were in chapter 6, and you'll be like, what's going on here? Another way to think of it is anybody familiar with the Lord of the Rings trilogy of movies? A lot of people have probably seen those. The Lord of the Rings trilogy was made first. And because of its success, the director, Peter Jackson, went back and made another trilogy from The Hobbit. But does the Lord of the Rings come first or does The Hobbit? The Hobbit comes first. So if you saw the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and then he made the Hobbit movies and you watch The Hobbit, it's confusing. Because the events in The Hobbit come before the Lord of the Rings. But it wasn't made that way. Similarly, let me read this note I put down at the bottom. Chapter 7 is a break between the judgment of chapters 6 and 8 for the purpose of describing how God sealed his people for salvation before the judgment started. Why did John do this? I don't know. Maybe some of you can help me with that. But it is the glory of God to conceal a matter, and to search out a matter is the glory of kings. Me and Michael talked about this a lot lately. Darren was there at breakfast last week when we were talking about this thing. Anybody can open the Bible and read the words. But to truly understand what is happening, God hides things, hides understanding for the people that want to know. Go ahead.
So let's just take this Proverbs 25:2 that he has up there. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. To search out a matter is the glory of kings. What if I were just to ask the question? Can anyone just say, what do you think that means?
I think it means that it's God's will for us to basically search the scriptures and meditate on them and then find the truth in that. That's when he reveals his truth. He doesn't just say every day you wake up and he's like, okay, Travis, here's your game plan. You have to read the scriptures, you have to be knowledgeable of it and be in touch with it. And then he speaks through his spirit to your heart.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, God expects us to put the puzzle together. They're puzzle pieces.
Kind of ties to seek and ye shall find.
Exactly.
Just an example, in the New Testament, Satan said, if we would have known that Jesus was the Messiah, we wouldn't have killed him. And I think a lot of us would say, if you read the Old Testament, it's clear that Jesus was going to be the Messiah.
Right. Yeah.
So how did Satan not know that? It's because of this verse. God hid that. Even though Satan can read the Bible, just like anybody else, reading the words does not mean understanding what they mean.
Well, to take that further, there are so many, and it starts in Deuteronomy 29. We've talked about it in Isaiah 6, but it's all over the place. It says that God hides this from their ears and their eyes, lest they be healed. So he has his reasons, and we know the verse, your ways are not my ways, my thoughts are not your thoughts. And so our human mind's like, that doesn't seem very fair, but I'm not God, so I have to accept it sometimes.
Well, isn't it like, I'll put it easier. I mean, it's like
How
Jeremiah
can it be
29.
easier than what I just said?
It's hard to say. You know when you work hard for something, it's like Jeremiah 29:11 and 13, right? Everybody likes to run with the 11th verse. You know, it says, for I know the plans I have for you, right? And everybody runs it, but they never read 12 and 13. Which says, so call on me, come and pray to me, and I will listen. And 13 says, and you will find me when you seek with all your heart. You know,
Right.
it's everybody likes to go with the first part, but they don't want to do the rest.
They
They
want
don't
God.
want to do the hard work.
Yeah, they
It's
want
like
God.
Travis said, it's okay to ask God questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, you were there, what was going, you know?
Yeah. Oh, just like at the Last Supper, where Peter said he would choose death rather than separate himself from Christ. As a perfect example there, we can't do this. It's up to God to do this type thing. And I'll use my intentional word. We got to be intentional about seeking.
And patient.
Yes, and I hate that word. That's it. And I hope this is a breeding ground for that, because we need to have the group that is tuteling each other. We need to come together to do these, because as Clark shared last week, It's not easy when you get out there, and we want to be a part of that salvation piece. Rare is that time that happens. Ours is to plant seed. How can we be a seed planter if we're not prepared to learn how to plant seed?
Yep. So as I start to explain what I'm talking about, how chapter 7 is a break in the action, if you will. The first thing I would say is chapter 6 describes the first 6 seals being opened and the 4 horsemen being released. But then chapter 7 says, wait, don't hurt anything until we have sealed the servants of God. So can you see how there's appears to be a little bit of problem there? Because the entire chapter 6 talks about the horsemen being released, and it describes the judgment being done. And then in the middle of the judgment, chapter 7 says, wait, before the judgment starts, after millions of people have died.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's what I'm talking about, and we'll get into it a little bit more. But first I want to recap a little bit of what Michael talked about last week, just because I want to make sure that we understand that the 4 winds, the 4 chariots, the horses, and the 4 spirits are all the same thing. Because different areas in the Bible refer to them differently, but it's the same. So Michael talked a little bit about this last week, but we're in Revelation 7, verses 1 through 3 says, Then I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds, so that they did not blow on the earth or the sea, or even on any tree. And I saw another angel coming up from the east, carrying the seal of the living God, and he shouted to those 4 angels who had been given power to harm land and sea, wait, don't harm the land or the sea or the trees until we have placed the seal of God on the foreheads of his servants. Now I want to recap from
Eric.
last... Yeah,
Where
sorry.
you going? Are you saying the 4 angels are the same as the 4 horsemen that were found? It's 4 angels.
No,
Oh, okay.
no, because it specifically says the
They seem
angels...
like they're doing a different job than the 4 horsemen.
Yeah, well, the 4 angels specifically are holding back the 4 winds.
Okay, all right, I got you.
So last week, I want to recap from last week to show that the 4 horsemen and the 4 winds are the same. In Zechariah 6, 1 through 5, I think Michael covered this last week.
Yeah.
Then I looked up again and saw the 4 chariots coming from between 2 bronze mountains. Travis talked about the meaning of bronze. The first chariot was pulled by red horses, the second by black horses, the third by white horses, and the fourth by powerful dappled gray horses. And what are these, my lord? I asked the angel who was talking with me. The angel replied, these are the 4 spirits. And then in my Bible app, there was a footnote that said, the 4 winds of heaven who stand before the Lord of all the earth. They are going out to do his work. So the point of this is just to say, it's kind of a recap, but it's just to show that when we're using these different passages in the Bible, whether it's Zechariah, Ezekiel, Zephaniah, Revelation, they're talking about the same event, but in one they say chariots, in the other one they say horses. In Revelation it says the 4 winds. It's all the same. So, go ahead.
I was just going to this review. I think I was reading up on chapter 6 that Michael was doing as you're doing this review. I read a guy, the famous theologian Google, I can't remember who it was, but that was talking about Revelation just as a book. And he was making the point, too often people go into it expecting to find the answer. And the way to look at Revelation as a book is that God's already said what he's going to do. This is John's vision of God doing it. Right? And so there's nothing being redefined, there's nothing being reimagined, there's nothing being redone. This is just
There's really nothing new in Revelation.
Nothing new.
It's not already said back.
I've said what I'm going to do.
There's a couple
Now I'm
of
doing
things,
it.
like the 144,000, but most of it's
Yeah.
obviously
So-
in the Old Testament you can reference.
As you go out and, I don't think any of us really fall into that group, but, you talk to people, that's something to keep in mind to explain to people, that, hey, law of the Psalms and the prophets, right? What Jesus used on the road to Emmaus with the 2 disciples. Law of Psalms, prophets. He's already said what he's going to do.
This
So-
is John's vision of him doing it.
Just as a silly example, say you're talking to someone and they bring up the four horses and they start talking about evil they are and that they're Satan's minions and all this. Right off the bat, if they're not referencing Zechariah, they don't know what they're talking about. And I hate to say it like that, but that's just the truth.
God has said what he's
God
gonna do.
said what they are.
Now
He's
they're gonna do it.
defined
Right.
it.
So-
We just have to find it.
Well, in that wisdom that Michael's talking about comes from searching out the word. Now, I can understand if somebody says that the four horsemen are from the devil because they're evil. If you just read that chapter in Revelation
Yeah.
and you look at what they're doing, it would be easy to think that they're evil.
But
But
I'm
that's,
saying you guys who are educated, we've referenced this and shown where it comes from. When you have these kind of conversations, you know, I'm not saying get in an argument about it. I'm just saying, well, you know what it actually says over here.
and that's why it's so important when we study to get your Bible with the footnotes, with the references, and go back to the Old Testament, because in that vein is kind of what this slide is about. One of the things I want to talk about in this slide is how we stumble over who is the 144,000, why are they being sealed, all that kind of stuff. But I want to go back to something in Ezekiel and try to make the point that it's possible that the Jews would have known what it meant, because like what Kim and Michael were just saying, this isn't new stuff. For us it's new, or we think it is because we haven't seen it before, but all the Jewish children went to Torah school from the time they were born till what, they were 12 or something?
Let's be honest. Most people are biblically illiterate. That's just the way it is. Not so much here, but in the world.
They've got their favorite verse or their favorite
Yeah.
sentence, and that's what
Yeah,
they.
and most people spend all of their time. Most Christians spend all of their time in the New Testament, and so they try to interpret the Old Testament with the New. You know, they
Yeah.
try to
Which is
apply,
backwards.
apply everything.
Yeah, it's backwards.
And let's face it, a lot of people use the Bible, like I said, they just read the New Testament.
Yeah.
They're using it as a self-help book.
Right.
A lot of them.
They want to justify what they're
Live my
doing.
best life now. How's this gonna help my situation? How's this gonna fix my situation?
Jesus is gonna make me perfect here on earth.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that want to use it to justify their actions.
Right.
All right,
Yeah.
let's get to this.
Anyway, carry on.
So let me look at verse 3. It says, again, it says, wait, don't harm the land or the sea nor the trees until we have placed the seal of God on the foreheads of the servants. Now this might look like new information for us, but what I want to point out is that there's an example of God doing this exact same thing before in the Old Testament, in Ezekiel. And the first thing I want to point out about it is the banner. In the NLT, it says the slaughter of idolaters. And in your Bibles, it probably says something different, but it's similar. So one of the points, and this will lead to, this is kind of a clue that you might not see right now, but it's kind of a clue for me of who the 144,000 are. Now in Ezekiel chapter 9, 1 through 4, it says, then the Lord thundered, bring on the men appointed to punish the city. Similar to the horsemen, the four horsemen. And the city is Jerusalem. Because if you look at chapter 8, we're in chapter 9 now, but if you look at chapter 8, Ezekiel's pronouncing judgment against Jerusalem because they are worshiping other gods. And then in chapter 10 is when the glory of God leaves the temple. So if you think of that picture that Michael put up on the screen a few weeks ago that everybody loved, of the big platform with the cherubim under the corners and the throne of God on it, and he's leaving the temple, that's what this is about. It says, 6 men soon appeared from the upper gate that faces north, each carrying a deadly weapon in his hand. So in Ezekiel there were 6 men compared to 4 in Revelation, but the story is the same. With them was a man dressed in linen who carried a writer's case at his side. They all went into the temple courtyard and stood beside the bronze altar. Then the glory of God of Israel rose up between the cherubim where it had rested and moved to the entrance of the temple. And the Lord called to the man dressed in linen who was carrying the writer's case and said to him, walk through the streets of Jerusalem and put a mark on the foreheads of all who weep and sigh because of the detestable sins being committed in their city. You see that? This is another example of the exact same thing. In Revelation 7, God is saying before judgment starts, seal the people. In Sodom and Gomorrah, God said before judgment starts, the angels get Lot out. Okay? In Ezekiel, and Noah the same way. In Ezekiel, before God releases judgment on Jerusalem for worshiping other gods, He's going to seal a certain number of people. Now, it doesn't say 144,000 here, but the context is Jerusalem, which is in Israel, and Jews. Okay? Because they were worshiping other gods. Okay.
Are you gonna go on to verse 5?
Go ahead.
Well then,
That whole chapter is awesome.
the whole chapter is great, but just to continue that thought, so in verse 5, to continue line 144,000. So, and as I listened, so I as Ezekiel, he said, he being God, to the others, follow him through the city and start killing. Do not show pity or spare anyone. Verse 6, slaughter the old men, the young men, the maidens, the women, and the children, but do not go near anyone who has the mark.
And start where?
At my sanctuary.
Temple.
My Bible says sanctuary.
Mine says sanctuary.
So, this is where we get into, in Revelation 7, 4 through 8, it gets into the 144,000. And I heard the number of the seal. 144,000 sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. And then he goes, the next several verses, saying 12,000 from each tribe. So, this is where the question arises, who are the 144,000? Some people believe these 144,000 people, and feel free to jump in. You know, I'm going to read some stuff here, but feel free to jump in, and if you...
I'm going to let you talk, and then I'm going to jump into you.
Yeah. Okay. Some people believe these 144,000 people are a metaphor for the entire church, Jew and Gentile. As you know, I love finding metaphors in the Bible, but I don't believe this is one. I personally choose to read Revelation 7, 5 through 8 literally, because I can't find an example in the Bible where it uses the tribes of Israel to refer to anyone else other than the tribes of Israel. I believe in order to use a metaphor, you have to find an example where that has been done before, and I don't see it. Also, Revelation 7:3 says that God sealed the foreheads of his servants, and when you look at the example in Ezekiel 9 that we just read, where he did the exact same thing, you see that it was in the context of Israel and the Jews. God was bringing judgment on Israel, but first he told his servants to seal the foreheads of the people who lamented the sin in the city of Jerusalem. These 2 points lead me to believe the 144,000 people sealed are Jews that are sealed for the purpose that Israel was created for in the first place, to be a light to the world, in this case, during the Great Tribulation, which is kind of what Clarence was talking about before he skedaddled. Israel was created to be this force in the world, and they haven't done it. They haven't
Fulfilled their role.
They haven't fulfilled that role, but they will. And I believe this that John is talking about here, the 144,000 people, these are Jews that God sets aside from destruction to be a light to the world in the tribulation and the Great Tribulation. Go ahead, Michael.
Anyone else have any idea what they want to say, who they think they are?
Sure. I just think they're the remnant. God always has, even when people think in the Old Testament, like, oh, Israel's lost, there's no one left. God always has a remnant. He always has believers that are always there. And I think these are the remnant of Israel in the future. And nothing in the text makes me think they're evangelists. I know it's popular belief. I'm not saying they're not going to evangelize, but there's nothing in Scripture that says they're going to evangelize or be.
Right.
But I think they will because they're believers and it's the end times. They want to preach, share the gospel, but
So if they're not gonna do that, what is God saving them for?
primarily to be a remnant,
So
to be Israel.
they're actually killed, because in chapter 14 we'll see that they've been killed. So my take, I've heard, I'm going to give you two different views. One is, remember when Jesus was resurrected, and there's that short little verse, half a sentence, that says the dead came out of the tombs. Some say that that's who these people are. They're called first fruits, which is what these people are called. But because of the context, there's no chapter breaks in the original language, obviously. And what did we read previously is that the souls under the altar, how long, O Lord? And it goes on in chapter 14, after describing these, which I think are clearly Jewish people, that they're virgins and they're male, and it says they've not been defiled by women. So there's no women here, which doesn't seem fair if you're talking about, well, I just choose men, but that's another story.
So you're saying that in this 144,000, there's no women?
There's no women.
It's just all
It
men.
says they're all men, and that they're all virgins, and they've not been defiled by women.
That's interesting.
Preach on, brother.
Well, I'm just saying, I mean,
I think
I'm not trying to make a point.
I'll let you finish, but I've got another idea.
Sums it all up.
Go ahead, Clint.
No,
Well-
but my point is
Oh, good.
that with the context and everything, because verse 4 of chapter 14, it says, "These are the ones who are not defiled with women, for they are virgins. They are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been purchased from among men as first fruits to God and to the Lamb." What was I getting? So it looks like that they, to me, it looks like that they are with Jesus when he returns as the first fruits. And so, because we talk
Or it
about
could be the first resurrected.
yeah, because we talk about the tribulation and that how it's, and I forget what verse it is because it's in my own slides and notes of this chapter. But basically, it says that they're the ones who have come out of the tribulation. Which to me, I think they might be the martyrs under the soul during the tribulation. They're faithful Jews that have been called to witness or whatever, because by their testimony in chapter 6, by their testimony they have overcome. So that's my 2 cents. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying that's my. I'm speculating like we're all doing on this.
And they're not eunuchs either, right?
I don't think they're eunuchs at all, because they evidently didn't defile themselves, which means they could
Yeah,
have.
could have.
What,
if they
what are
were-
you volunteering? Are you volunteering?
To be a eunuch?
Mm.
I'm way past that. Way past that.
No, I agree with Travis that I think this is the remnant from the Old Testament. But I got in a full nerd mode one time and did the math on the current population of Israel, and ended up with the 144,000 number. If you go through Jacob's trouble, there's, I can't remember the exact number, it's something like 9.2 million Jews that are killed during Jacob's trouble to land at 144,000. I mean, there's going to be a second,
There's survivors.
Holocaust.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a third survived.
And so if these other
There's
100,
9 million is,
Yeah.
basically 30 million.
Question.
there's, right,
I'm sorry. I'm just asking, I don't wanna forget, so. Is it possible that the 144,000 is not necessarily an exact number? It's just an explanation that there will be some left over?
That gets into, do you believe it's literal or do you believe it's a metaphor?
Symbolic or not, yeah.
I think if you did break it down to the 12,000 per tribe, you got a basis for an argument. The fact he gets into these tribes, 12,000, gets it more literal. Because they're pulling these people out somewhere, you know? There's a specific amount.
Like Eric said, we don't have an
I
example of a
mean-
metaphor doing this same math with things like this.
Yeah, for me, I mean, for me to say that it represents something else, I would have to see an example of that.
No,
Now, if you can
And
handle
just-
Forrest Clark, we'd have.
And I don't,
If you would read your Bible,
I mean, trust me, I don't have a problem presenting a controversial interpretation.
Right.
If there's, like, if you go all the way back, I don't think, well, Caleb and Daniel are here today, but if you go all the way back when we were in Genesis, remember that crazy stuff I was saying in
Yeah,
Genesis?
yeah.
Like, we were talking about the trees
The river.
in the Garden of Eden, and the river, and the fruit, and I found this verse that nobody ever talks about, I think it was in Ezekiel or something, where God is talking to Lucifer, and he was saying, you were like a tree in the garden.
Yeah.
So then I was taking that to interpret that maybe a literal interpretation of the trees in the garden was trees, but that it was a metaphor that Adam and Eve weren't the only beings
People.
in the garden. That there was angels and there was other council members and all that kind of stuff. And God was telling them, you can talk to any of them that you want, but stay away from this one. Who is that one? The devil. So, I mean, I don't have a problem presenting stuff like that if there's an example.
No, I got
If there's something that points to it, but I just don't see it for this.
And these verses aren't, I mean, it's not super clear because verse 9, people will interpret verse 9 as after, he says, after these things, I look, first, remember verse 7:1 says, after this, after what? Chapter 6 we were looking at. Then it says, he gets to the number of the 104,000, verse 9 in chapter 7. After these things I looked, so now it's switching again to a different vision, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could count. Well, he just counted 144,000. So if it was a metaphor, he wouldn't have made such a specific count.
No, I got you.
So
What do you think, Mike? I see you over there making facial expressions and stuff.
No, I think these are definitely the Jewish remnant, is what I believe, the 144,000.
Yeah.
Now, the next question would be, is it a different scene for the multitude you can't count?
well,
Which, yes.
what I was
I smell what you're stepping in. I'm gonna go that way here in a second.
What I was going to say was, I think you have this that John is showing this 144,000 around the throne. Okay. Then you have another multitude, a great multitude that cannot be numbered around them and more circular. That's what I think you're seeing here.
because now you're describing Isaiah 25.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
well,
what you're.
That makes more
I'm
sense.
having
to me
trouble
now.
believing the
I'm on that.
144,000 is the remnant in its entirety.
mm-mm,
I would say that's a subset.
I'm not
of the
saying that at
remnant.
all.
Yeah, yeah.
So please don't misunderstand.
Because
I'm
those-
not-
those
That's
are-
what I've heard
that's
said
what
2 or 3 times.
Yeah, someone
Yes,
said it, but I don't
that's
agree
what
with
was
that.
said. Yeah.
The remnant is at least a third.
It's
of
a
the-
subset of, the
Yeah.
144,000 is a
Well,
subset.
I'm not sure who they are.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say they're subset of X. I don't know. I just don't know. We're kind of just jumping.
Are you
I mean,
saying that?
Yeah.
As far as I don't know about Travis, that's not a hill I'm willing to die on. Like, I'm not going to
No,
die,
no,
you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, okay, this is,
Right.
but
I don't
some,
think Travis is either.
I don't think Travis is either.
Yeah.
But something you're describing that, if you remember back to Ezekiel there in the 40s where he's describing the big temple being built and then they're going to come back into the land and consecrate the land, blah, blah, blah. He starts with describing the priests, and they're not numbered, but they've all got these different roles of guarding this gate and guarding that gate and guarding this entrance and guarding that and doing this ceremony and that's going to be a bunch of people. And then the priests of Zadok or somebody are going to be in the Holy of Holies doing the actual, because they're the ones that saved themselves. So, I mean, you could add that, say that number's 144,000, I'm grasping at straws here.
Well, we don't want to. I don't think it.
We're going to end up on a bunch of rabbit trails, and
Let me,
that's how the rabbit trail will go down.
in this next slide, let me address something for the benefit of people because there are a lot of people that really want to believe that these 144,000 encompass the entire church. They want everybody to have a spot,
That's what most of the church believes.
Yeah.
that they are Jews and Gentiles.
Yeah.
So one of the things I want to say here is that what I've said so far doesn't mean that the Gentiles are left out. And this is where I might start going where Mike was alluding. I believe the account of the 144,000 and the vast crowd in verse 9 are two different groups in two locations at two different times. Verse 3 says the winds weren't allowed to blow on the earth, which is where the 144,000 were before the first seal was opened. Why was God telling them to hold back the winds? Because he didn't want the 144,000 to die. So they're on the earth, not in heaven. Verse 9 says the vast crowd composed of all nations, tribes, peoples, and languages, or Jew and Gentile, were standing in front of the throne of God and before the Lamb. The 144,000 are on the earth alive. I believe going to be witnesses and be fulfilling the mission of Israel. And but the vast crowd is composed of everybody. So for me, it's like verse 14 says that they were people that had died in the Great Tribulation. So it's like I said, two different groups, two locations, at two different times. You have the 144,000 Jews that are set apart to be witnesses, and then they die in the tribulation. And then in a future time, John is seeing another vision of Jews and Gentiles that died in the Great Tribulation standing before God, which includes the 144,000. That's what I think. Let's mull that over a little bit, because I know I just said a lot, and you might have to watch this video again when you get home to think about it. What do you think, Michael?
I think the scene shifts in verse 9, as we've just talked about. It's obviously in heaven, okay, before Jerusalem comes down. And so you've also got to, we've talked about this at the beginning, and we've talked about it before in other classes. These are recapitulations, the retelling of the stories. We've all have watched movies where, they're telling you a story, and then all of a sudden it goes back and tells you from a different perspective.
Like a flashback?
Yeah, flashback or more details and everything. That's what you're seeing here in Revelation. And so chapter 14 is same, like if you go back to chapter 6 at the end, chapter 6, all of that end part, that includes the wrath of God. It's over. Well, then why do we have the rest of Revelation? Because it's a recapitulation of everything. It's doing different things here. And so you have to, this is why people get very frustrated and confused, going through it, because if you don't understand that it's retelling the story in a different way, like a movie, or a flashback, whatever.
Which is why I said at the beginning, you can't just start at Revelation 1 and read through to 21 or 22 or however many chapters is in there and know what's going on. Go ahead.
So, I don't know that I've got a point here. I'm just trying to think this through.
That's fine.
Yeah, but think of the context here. God's unleashing his wrath, and there's a point to it, to bring more believers.
Yeah,
Give them one last
the
chance,
text.
kind of.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm going to make it so hard on you. If you don't capitulate now, you're gone. And then in this period, he saves this 144,000 as helpers. That's really, you said it doesn't say they're evangelists, which I kind of thought they were, but maybe.
I think they are.
But they're helpers.
I think
So what are they helping him do? I would think maybe they're helping him get those ones that will capitulate and come over to him.
Yeah, I think they're tied into the two witnesses to help believe the Jewish because Jewish people aren't listening to Gentiles.
Right.
So it's probably that.
Trying to get just the Jews too, along with the Gentiles.
Right.
And so then when you get to that vast, that includes everybody, the ones us that have been grafted in.
Right.
Because I'd always heard the 144,000 were going to be evangelists going to travel the whole world, evangelize the whole world. And
I believe they might be, because the vast crowd includes Gentiles.
Correct. I don't think that. I think they're more specific to Israel.
Yeah.
And their mission will be Israel.
Yeah.
And the whole global thing, that was just.
Well, don't forget later, there's
Makes a lot of
also the
sense.
two
Yeah,
angels that
makes a lot of
circumnavigate the earth spreading the gospel.
That's a whole other topic when we get there. Just hold on.
Keep the brakes, buddy.
Okay, Ken, we should let you go.
In essence.
So,
This is their second.
This is my final slide, and my final part on this slide is a summary of what I believe is happening in chapter 6, 7, 8, and 12, and
Throughout the
just
Bible.
the story. This is what I believe the chronological timeline is from the different areas. So, remember, I'm not intending to teach anybody anything. This is just what I believe based on what I've been studying this week, and we'll have more conversation after, but in summary, I believe God seals the foreheads of his servants in Israel in chapter 7. Then he releases the 4 horsemen to perform God's judgment on the world in chapters 6 and 8. Satan is cast out of heaven where he has been accusing the brethren day and night in chapter 12. This event is the start of the Great Tribulation, that is the last 3.5 years of the tribulation period, because Satan realizes his time is short and he pours out his wrath on the Jews. The 144,000 sealed Jews are a witness to the world in the tribulation, and a vast crowd become born again and are martyred for their faith. The vast crowd of the Jews and Gentiles that are martyred by the Antichrist are standing before the throne of God and the Lamb, praising him for their salvation in verses 9 through 17 of chapter 7.
Can I ask a question from last week since I wasn't here?
No, this is what you should believe.
Did you not laugh?
No, I was busy playing golf.
In Dubai.
No, Oregon.
Gotta have your priorities.
That you do. So we're saying that these martyrs that are before the throne are the martyrs of the tribulations, not the martyrs from throughout history.
That's what I'm saying.
That's what you're saying?
I believe they're from the tribulation.
Okay.
I mean, I know a lot of people believe they're all martyrs, and they may be. We're
Because
just
that's what I've always heard.
well,
That's what
and they
everyone's
may
talking
be.
about.
They may
Yeah.
be. There's nothing wrong with saying that. I just think, in the context of what we're looking at, that's what
Tribulation
what it
specific.
looks like, because they're in 14 of chapter 7, as I was kind of trying to find earlier, and I couldn't, but now I see it. Because I think it's the context of the 144,000 after this multitude, and because there in 13, one of the elders asked John, "Hey, these clothes and white robes, who are they, and from where do they come?" And John's like, "Why are you asking me? Don't you know?" You know, basically. And the angel says, "Hey, these are the ones that came out of the great tribulation."
Great
Right,
tribulation.
not the tribulation, the great
So
tribulation.
that great tribulation, as he points out here, is the last 3.5 years.
Okay. So again, we're looking at a picture of God said what he's going to do, and now he's done it, basically.
Yeah.
And I believe one of the things that might be hard in this is I believe there's a time shift. It's not just there's the 144,000 and there's the great crowd and they're together. There's the 144,000, stuff happens, and then the 144,000 become part of the great crowd when they're martyred. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
So have you ever seen one of those crazy movies about time travel and you can't figure out what's going on and you have to look up a YouTube video to watch somebody else explain what the movie was?
Yeah.
I can understand that this is kind of like that.
That's a good analogy.
But that's why I'm presenting this, and I'm saying I'm not trying to teach you. I'm not telling you what to believe. Because before this week, I didn't know any of this. This is just what I was coming across. What do you think, Travis?
Me, what do I think? I think that.
Not know, but heck no?
No, I think that it's going to blow people's mind and make it hard to accept, but in heaven, there is no time. The future and the past are all one. God is not restrained by time. We look at things chronologically because we believe in this happened first and this happens first. That does not happen in heaven. There is no such thing as time. God is beyond it. So I think if some of the multitude is from a different time period or what, it's all the same in God's eyes. I mean, it's.
I can understand that too, because that lines up with what Brent was saying when we were talking about who the 24 elders were. I said I believe the 24 elders might be the 12 fathers of the tribes and the 12 disciples. And Brent was saying if that's true, then that means John was seeing himself and writing about himself. That's weird.
Right, but time does not exist.
I mean, like what Travis was just saying, it's not a thing for God.
Right.
Yeah, one week's like 1,000 years, 1,000 years.
Right. I'm already in the book of Romans says that I was predestined, I was elected, and I was glorified. In God's eyes, I'm already glorified. That meaning in my eternal body with Him.
Well, and Jesus said,
That's only in
Once we
God's
become born
timing in
again-
His mind, not living it out here. Spiritually, yes. Physically, no.
well, Jesus said, once we're born again, we are seated at the right hand of God with Him. That means all of you at this table that are born again, at the same time that you are here physically, your spirit is seated with Christ
Yeah.
right now.
It's almost
How do you
it's almost
understand
like the vision
I
of
don't.
Moses.
Yeah.
I don't.
Before we're out of time, I just want everyone to look at verses 15, 16, and 17. They're the last three verses of this chapter. Because we're talking about retelling the story over in different ways, okay? If you read, we won't read them, but I'm just saying, if you read through those, that's the end, okay? He wipes away the tears. So, he's once again, as he did in the end of chapter 6, where you see the end. So now we're seeing the end again, but from a different perspective. You see how fast they go through it?
So,
And then it's recapitulating, it's
so
retelling
if that's
it.
the end, why do we need to read the rest of Revelation?
Because there's different ways, there's different
Just
details.
Because
Because I believe we're gonna have to live through it.
Yeah.
Well, and another way to think about
How
it
we're
would be,
going through to the end of the story multiple times as we go through the whole book.
another way to think about it would be the Gospels. It's four disciples telling
Yeah, you
the
read
same
five
story.
together.
They're telling it from a different perspective.
Beatitudes.
That's true.
So you're telling me something's important if it's repeated multiple times?
That too.
Verily, I say.
So we're almost out of time. Guys, this has been a really good conversation.
And it seems like we kind of all agree somehow.
What? At a certain level, we all agree
Thoughts might be a little
on,
different, but I think we all.
yeah, on a
that's
certain
the
level, we all
basic
agree
reason.
on a basic thing, but we just have different details and different thoughts about it here and there. So it's not one of those things where you're gonna walk out today and apply this to life. It's gonna affect how you treat your wife or your kids or something. It's not that kind of thing. It's just trying to understand what Revelation is talking about. So, does anybody wanna close us out in prayer?
Hey, I do have a prayer request that just popped up.
Yeah.
I just got a text message while we were not arguing, we were all agreeing.
I didn't say arguing.
But, so we got one of the girls from No Boundaries, after many years, is on her way right now to Kansas City to a rehabilitation center.
Praise the Lord.
So, she's been trafficked for about 20 years.